Hey, what is up guys? My name is Eric, and in today's episode, we're going to cover the topic on how to create a dynamic array in C++. Let's do this. Now, a while back, I taught you how to create arrays in C++. You're probably wondering, if we already learned how to create an array, why are we looking at this topic again? Because what we're going to be learning today is dynamic arrays, and those are completely different from the arrays that we've learned a few episodes back. Now, what makes these arrays different from the ones we've learned back then is that the arrays that we've learned before are actually called static arrays. Now, what that means is static arrays are basically arrays that have a fixed size. What do you mean by size? Well, by static arrays, I mean there's a fixed number of elements that your array can store. So for instance, if we were to create a static array that can only store 3 elements, meaning inside the square brackets, it would have a number 3 inside, then that's the maximum number of elements it can store. It cannot store 4, 5, or 6 elements, or even more, because the moment we created the array size of 3, that's what we're going to get, that's what we're going to stick with. We can't go beyond it. However, what if we wanted to create an array that can readjust itself in size? What if we wanted to create an array that can, let's say, add more items? And that is where dynamic arrays will come into play. So the topics we're going to cover in this video are: what is a dynamic array? What is the difference between a static and a dynamic array? And how to make a dynamic array in C++. First off, what is a dynamic array? A dynamic array is an array that can adjust its size during runtime. So what are the differences? First off, static arrays are fixed in size, like I said before. Static arrays allocate or reserve memory space in your computer's memory during compile time. Now, what compile time means is when the program is created. Not only that, static arrays are located in the stack memory space, meaning if we were to divide the computer's memory into chunks or sections, there's a certain section that is called the stack memory, and that's where static arrays are located. As for dynamic arrays, they're dynamic in size, meaning they could readjust its own size. How? Well, that's due to the second bullet point, and that is dynamic arrays allocate memory space during runtime, meaning when the program is running. And not only that, dynamic arrays are located in the heap memory space of your computer's memory. Again, it's just another section of your computer's memory. So how do we make a dynamic array? In fact, what do we need in order to make one? First off, we have to know how to create pointer variables. Second, we need to remember the concept of how to create arrays. And then finally, we're going to learn 2 new things, and that is the new operator and the delete operator. You're probably wondering, what is the new operator? Good question. In fact, the new operator is what will allow us to allocate memory space for our dynamic array during runtime. As for the delete operator, that is what's going to do the opposite of the new operator's functionality, and that is the delete operator will clear the space that the dynamic array was using. Why would we want to do that? Well, computers, as we know, have a finite amount of space, and we don't have to always use all of it all the time, right? So as soon as you no longer need that data stored in a dynamic array, we delete them. And by the way, it's not optional for you to put it or not put it. You have to put it. Somewhere down the line in your program, you have to put it there. Okay, so let's hop on over to Visual Studio and start coding a dynamic array, shall we? So here, I went ahead and commented out the syntax structure for a dynamic array. To create a dynamic array, you first have to create a pointer variable. Now, the name of your pointer variable will end up becoming the name of the dynamic array. So make sure your name is what you want your dynamic array to be. So as we learned, a pointer variable starts off with a data type, followed by the asterisk, followed by the name of the pointer variable. In this case, it will become the name of the dynamic array. Next, the second line, you would have to take the name of your pointer variable and set it equal to new, and then the data type that you gave your pointer variable, followed by a pair of square brackets, and then a value, a whole number value, which will represent the number of elements inside your dynamic array. And that's basically it. And then the third line will basically represent the lines of code you would mess around with your dynamic array, such as storing, removing, and all that good stuff. And then finally, on your very last line, you're going to have the delete operator line. And make sure when you do create this line, you include the empty square brackets followed by the name of the dynamic array you are going to clear the space for. Note that once this line is called, all the data stored in your dynamic array will be gone. Okay, so you're probably wondering, wait a minute. I thought this was a dynamic array. Well, it is. And you're probably wondering, okay, if that's the case, why is there a number of elements value inside the square brackets? Wouldn't it be empty, or shouldn't it have something more generalized so it could readjust its size? Well, that's where the fact that new comes into play. And not only that, this is where also the fact that dynamic arrays allocate memory space during runtime comes into play as well. It's because of the fact that it allocates memory space during runtime that makes it dynamic. So let me show you. So if we were to create a, let's say, int pointer variable, and let's say my dynamic array, and then let's say my dynamic array equals new, and then int, because that's the data type for our pointer variable that we went with, semicolon, and then inside the square brackets, we would give it a value. Let's say 3, just to keep things simple. And then let's say we're going to assign it values. So my dynamic array 0 equals, let's say, 100. And then my dynamic array 1 equals 200. And then my dynamic array 2 equals 300. And then if we were to see out, actually, let's see. Let's do a for loop. So for int I equal to 0, I less than 3, I plus plus. This will allow us to loop through the dynamic array and display each value onto the console window. So cout, let's see, my dynamic array, and then I, and then end line. Okay, so if we're to run and compile this program, we should see 100, 200, 300 listed vertically. And as you can see, it lists 100, 200, 300 vertically. Perfect. Now, time to prove to you why this is there and why this is dynamic still. So let's say we wanted to increase to 5 elements, okay? So in that case, we're gonna have to run the delete operator. So delete, empty brackets, and then name of your dynamic array, my dynamic array, semicolon. Okay, so at this point, if we were to try and see out this array, what do you think we will get? Do you think we will even compile this successfully? Let's see. As you can see, the program stopped working. Okay, so that means as soon as you run the delete operator, you can no longer use the dynamic array. However, we can actually use it, and not only that, we can readjust the size at this point. So like I said, let's say we want to resize it so it could store 5 elements. So my dynamic array equals new int 5. Okay, and then let's say we want to copy and paste this down, and then let's say 10, 20, 30, and then let's say my dynamic array 3 equals to 40, and then my dynamic array 4 equals to 50. Okay, that's 5 values. So we're to compile and run this program. What do you think we will get? No errors, right? But as you can see, it shows, okay, I forgot to use the loop here. My bad. So if we're to copy and paste that on the bottom, change the 3 to a 5, and then let's do a cout in between. So cout here ends dynamic 3, just so we know where it ends. Okay, so if we're to compile and run this program again, we should see 5 values after the 3. And as you can see, it shows 100, 200, 300, which is the first few parts of our code, followed by the cout that marks the end of that, and then the 5 values, which readjusted the size to 5 elements. And as you can see, it shows 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 without any problem at all. Okay, so you're probably wondering at this point, okay, but what if we don't know what the size is going to be? What if we want the user, or maybe we want an external API to determine the size for us? Well, in that case, we're going to have to delete the value inside the brackets and give it a variable name. So let's call it count. And then outside, let's create int count. And then let's see out how many values to store in the dynamic array. And then cin count. So that way it will allow our user to determine the size of our dynamic array. So if we were to delete this bottom chunk right here, remember, keep the delete, and then run and compile this program. Okay, well actually before we do that, let's update our loop to count. Okay, and then we were to compile and run this program again. Okay, as you can see, it shows how many values do you do you want to store in the dynamic array? Let's say 10. And as you can see, it shows the first 3 values that was assigned. However, the last few values, last 7 values, are just a bunch of gibberish values, right? Well, that's because we didn't store anything there. And these are just default values that the computer's memory filled up with. Now, like I said, let's say we add a few more lines of code, okay? So let's say 3, 4, and 5. And then debug. And then let's say we give it a size of 10 again. As you can see, it shows 100, 200, 300, 300, 300, 300, and then some random values. Perfect. Because I didn't update the values when I copied and pasted. That's why it shows 300 still. But what if we want to ask the user to enter some values in? So in that case, we would have to use a for loop. So for int I equal to, let's say int k equal to 0, k less than count, k plus less. So this time I want to ask the user to input values. So cout input value, cin my dynamic array, and then k semicolon, and then let's say cout nline, just to make a space. So if we were to compile and run this program, let's see what would happen. So let's say, how many values do you want to store in the dynamic array? Let's do 10 again. Okay, input value, let's say 100, 200, 300, 400, 500, 600, 700, 800, 900, and 1000. Enter. As you can see, our program allowed us to enter the 10 values as we stated before, and it'll stop once all 10 values are stored, and it'll display all 10 values. And as you can see, it shows 100 all the way to 1000, which is exactly what we've inputted up here. And then the program ends. Perfect. So with this, you have learned how to create and use a dynamic array in C++. Thank you for watching this tutorial, and if you have any questions about this topic or anything at all about dynamic arrays, be sure to leave it in the comments below, like the video if you found it helpful, and subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you next time.